part of our political elite just is so wedded to the West that they can't seem to get out of that. I mean, look at the World Bank. We had, two Pakistanis who served as vice presidents. At the UN also, we had a distinguished Pakistani who served as the chef de cabinet.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Alchemy of Transformation, where we go in depth into what is the essence of alchemy change in human beings, transformation of human beings, transformation of society, transformation of organizations, and the transformation of humanity. One of the things that is of utmost importance here in Pakistan, but for every nation, is foreign policy, the place and the position of that country, their influence in the League of Nations. We have certain people who are called the Grand Central Strategists. These were people like Metternich who defined foreign policy not only for their country, but for their region and indeed for great superpowers. In that tradition, we have people like Mearsheimer, Joseph Nye. Metternich created the term balance of power, and with Joseph Nye, it is soft power. And these are thinkers who think of foreign policy in grand things. With us today, we have who I consider as a grand central strategist in foreign policy for Pakistan, but also for emerging nations, particularly in South Asia. Someone who has been an academic. She was a PhD from my alma mater. So one thing common with her is she did PhD from the London School of Economics, came back to Pakistan, left England, came back to Pakistan to Quaid-e-Azam University to teach, and then became a journalist. In fact, she was the first female editor of a broadsheet across Asia, the Daily Muslim, and then went on to found the most popular English daily newspaper, The News, in Pakistan, and then went on to become an ambassador to the United States. People only become an ambassador to the United States once, but she became ambassador twice. And actually at both at very difficult times. First time Pakistan was facing sanctions of Pressler Amendment, and then second time it was before and during the war on terror or the 9/11 calamity. And then later on became the Pakistan's ambassador in UK and the UN. But now she's back in Pakistan and having time to think about things. I thought to sit down with her and think about the foreign policy challenges that we face today in Pakistan. So please join me in welcoming Miss and Ambassador Maleeha Lodhi. Welcome to Alchemy of Transformation, Ambassador Saiba.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great. So tell us about, we always start from the self because it is all about a country in context of other nations. It's also always about the human being, the self, in the context of all that is happening around you. One thing I think we have, another thing common, is that we both have some relationship come from a small town of Rawalpindi. It's not the most happening town, but certainly if you want to understand power dynamics in Pakistan and the essence of power, you got to understand Rawalpindi. And I think you and I have some common legacy that we come from Rawalpindi. But tell us about your upbringing and some of the early life experiences that got you to be the person that you are today.
Well, I'll try to keep a long story short. Yes, I did do my schooling in Rawalpindi, but I'm originally from Lahore. My parents both were professionals. My father was in the oil industry. My mother was a journalist, and she had to give up journalism when she got married because also that was the time of partition. So, she and my father were both very inspirational figures in my life. I think what they taught me above all was to, strive for whatever goal that you set for yourself. And that goal must be bigger than yourself. So, the notion of public service was in a way instilled very early in me. But to be honest with you, even when I came out of university, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I mean, I got a break at teaching at the LSE itself. but I wasn't sure, whether this is what I want to do or, something else. So, I found much of life is luck, chance, and accident. And things happen, opportunities present themselves, and then it's what you make of those opportunities. So, early life very clearly influenced by my parents, and of course the environment in which I grew up. Rawalpindi, a small town, but it was a happening place. Much happened there. And my school, I went to a convent, and I think I learned a lot of, universal human values from the nuns. And I also learned how you must be tolerant of people of different faiths. And only if you respect them will they respect you back.
Presentation convent, I'm sure that's where you went, and my sisters went there. I went to the counterpart, St. Mary's Academy, and indeed I can totally agree with that. I think I could, because we have lived in multiple cultures. So I always say the great thing about St. Mary's, and so it was Presentation Convent, that we have Senator Wasim Sajjad's son who used to come and study there. He used to come in a fancy car, and then we have someone else who would come on a cycle. And then you have a very small table that you'd be sitting someone next to who could be a Christian. And so you felt the diversity of Pakistan, and you accepted it, and it didn't matter. And I think that had a huge impact on me, and I can imagine that had on you as well.
Yes, it certainly did. But of course, one was always conscious that we came from privileged backgrounds because we had access to education and quality education at that. So, that too influenced one's approach in terms of looking at the country and sort of saying, if only this country had had governments that had had a long-term vision and had educated our children. Today, as you know, 22 million school-going children are out of school, out of which 12 million are girls. Now, what kind of a future can these children possibly have when we can't provide them with education? So, you and I, we had the privilege, we had the good fortune of getting an education. And I think for our parents' generation, education was everything. I remember my father saying many times to me that, look, we're not super rich people, but I can give you the biggest treasure that you will value all your life, and that is a good education. And he was absolutely right. I inherited no lands, no property, no none of that, but I inherited the best thing that could have been given to me, which was an education.
What a wonderful investment, and look at the return on that investment and where that has taken you. And not only in material terms, but in terms of experiences in life, in terms of authority and power that you've had. So definitely that's the case. I'm interested to know, how did you end up going abroad in those days as a female? Those were not the days. Now there's a lot more women, and it's changed a lot to go abroad to study. And so how easy, how difficult it was. It was also a time when there was the stigma that, for women is mostly about doctor. My mother is a doctor, but mostly it's either becoming a doctor or a teacher. And then, of course, you did a PhD, but you went into journalism. Your mother had some role in there. But how did you choose an unconventional path?
Well, I think, going abroad to study was, not that unusual. But yes, you're right. There were fewer girls who went at that time because it meant that we were living on our own. And, this was the era of the 1970s, I have to acknowledge, because that gives my age away. But then, of course, a lot of other things give my age away. Okay. So, that kind of education was certainly not available in Pakistan. So one was, lucky, fortunate to have access to that. But in terms of, in terms of what one learned there, I think it was a very cosmopolitan place. You've been there, you've been to the same institution. And of course, London itself is a very cosmopolitan city. So again, the whole notion of diversity, the kind of people one came across from all over the world, actually, in a way, it sort of opens your horizons, it opens your mind to so much that you've never really never really thought of. And then journalism, as I said, so much of life is luck, chance, and accident. I'd never thought about journalism, even though my mother's sort of career, which she was not able to sort of continue with, did have an influence on me. But it was really, again, an accident in terms of an offer that was made to me to write about exiled politicians, because that was the era of Zia, and a number of our political leaders were exiled in London. So what I was asked to do was to meet these people, figure out what their plans were, and basically write at a time when there was censorship in Pakistan. So that too was a challenge. So again, I got this opportunity and I did it, not really realizing that this would become my career. But when I started doing it, I really loved it. I enjoyed it. I loved writing. I loved covering politics. So that when I returned to Pakistan, there was a job waiting for me at, the only independent newspaper that existed at that time, called The Muslim.
Yes.
And I took up that job, and then I found that within a year of taking up that job, again by accident, I ended up as being the editor of that newspaper, which was a great honor for me.
No, absolutely. These jobs were very far and few in those days. People didn't know about them. So I think luck and hard work must have played the role. And so tell us about, growing up, whether it was Presentation Convent or Rawalpindi, or the family. How has hard work and other values that you've developed from your personal experiences, and how have they influenced your career, and particularly in difficult times post 9/11, when you faced a very kind of a challenging situation in the US as an US ambassador? How did it help you later on in your life, in your career?
Well, I think I mean, as far as hard work is concerned, I saw that when I was growing up, in the way that my father, a thorough professional, who took great pride in his work. I mean, the way hard work paid off for him. He rose to the top in the oil industry. And again, I learned much from him. But in terms of having to deal with challenging situations, I think, in a way, nothing really prepares us for it. There's no primer. There's nothing that you can refer to and say, okay, so here's the ABC of what you do in a crisis. You learn by doing. And I think the values or the qualities that help you is your belief that what you're doing is something that you really are committed to. You believe in it. So in other words, you're not doing it as a 9-to-5 occupation. You're doing it as a commitment. And that makes you, in a way, unfazed in the face of crisis. And it gives you the inner confidence that clearly you need as you navigate and negotiate these various crises. Now, you talk about 9/11. Yes, I was the ambassador of Pakistan in Washington at that time. And, it was unprecedented. We had never confronted anything like that before. And, there was a great deal of hostility initially because, Pakistan was regarded as the best friend of the Taliban. And it was under the Taliban that Al-Qaeda emerged, and therefore, Afghanistan, the Taliban were held responsible for what had happened. So it was a kind of a guilt by association that people in America were judging Pakistan by. So it wasn't easy. But of course, the moment we had offered our cooperation, which, as you know, was our international obligation, everything changed. Public opinion as well as official opinion in America was transformed. And we, went from being viewed with great sort of suspicion to being viewed in a let's say, a cooperative way. But even then, I think the challenge at that time was to engage as much as possible in public diplomacy, because often traditional diplomats tend to focus on government-to-government relations and are perhaps reluctant or shy about stepping outside that domain. Because I did not come from that background, I came from the private sector. I didn't feel that kind of constraint at all. And I felt one needed to get out there and explain to ordinary Americans and to think tanks and to the media, etc., exactly where Pakistan stood at that time. And, the other thing that I found was that I was, not just supposed to explain where Pakistan stood, but in a way, I was being viewed as a representative of Muslims. So as a Muslim woman, because as you remember at that time, there were all sorts of negative, stereotypes and negative thinking about Islam and Muslims after what had happened. I mean, in fact, terrorism was being equated with our faith. So, there I had to explain, in a way, act as a representative of the Muslim world, as it were. And I wasn't prepared to do that. I remember I was invited to the Oprah Winfrey show, for example,
Wow.
which has a huge, as you know, the kind of viewership.
That's the biggest
Oprah
honor one could get.
Yeah, and Oprah says to me, well, can you just explain what it means to be a Muslim?
So,
what
do you say to that?
Exactly. So, you had to also speak in sound bites.
Sound bites.
Nobody had the time. In fact, even diplomacy had to be conducted largely through sound bites, at least on the Hill with Congress, because, congressmen don't have the time to sit and get a history lesson from you, and nor are they interested in a history lesson. All they want to know is, okay, so what's happening? Where are you guys coming from? And where are you guys going?
Yeah.
So you learn, and I guess I learned on the job, diplomacy by soundbite, and also media performances where you're trying to explain things to people who know virtually nothing about you or your part of the world. They don't even know where Pakistan is on a map. But somehow you've got to get them to relate to you. And for me, that was the key. You have to speak in a manner that they can relate to. Because if you speak in a way that is, alien to them, frankly.
Too emotional and too intellectual,
exactly.
It has to kind of
Exactly, yes.
No, I think what you said, and we'll come back to the US incident, the 9/11, is there is something called being a professional. And I think that we as a nation, a lot of people don't get properly what it means to be a professional. And I think your father had a huge role because he's a professional himself, is to be very objective and to the best that you can do. And I will narrate an incident that we had. You had invited me to speak at the United Nations for a social impact conference, and I was hell-bent upon wearing a shalwar kameez and a waistcoat. And I was very persistent, and I can be very persistent. And then you told me in a very professional way that, look, there was a certain prime minister who wanted to go in a national attire, and I had advised him to wear a suit because that's what is the decorum. And he followed it, so you should know that. So and I think that was the right advice, and I did follow your advice. And I think that's important, that professionals have to be objective, that they have to be in a way fearless, and they have a loyalty to their vocation and the work they do, and that is what you need in a situation. And unfortunately, in our part of the world, loyalty or saying yes to everything, to power, is what is appreciated more. But being a professional is what Pakistan needs.
Yes, absolutely. I also think, when I used to advise people, I also think, it's fine. One is, of course, proud of one's heritage and national dress, etc.
Yes, of course.
But nationalism is not confined to the apparel that you wear. It's in your heart and it's in your mind. You don't have to demonstrate it by the clothes that you wear. You demonstrate it by your actions and your conduct. But in any case, I agree. I think professionalism is something that, and that sort of, often I'm asked as a woman, what are the qualities you need? And I always answer, none different than what a male professional needs.
Yes.
There's no difference.
Absolutely.
We've got to have the same, we fall back on the same skills. that are required to make us professionally competent.
So you became the first time ambassador. Let's go to that. And by Mohtarma Shahid Benazir Bhutto Sahiba, I believe that was a pure choice. She found that you might be the right person. It may have been an experiment. I don't know, but tell us about your experience of working with Mohtarma Benazir Bhutto. I think she was in arena of foreign policy as certainly a class act. She did give India a very tough time, and she was a good representative of Pakistan. But share us about your first stint working with Mohtarma and your first stint, which not many people talk about. But let us go into that.
But that also, was again luck, chance, accident, because I had never thought of diplomacy ever. It was the late Benazir Bhutto who said to me, "I'd like you to go as our ambassador first to Moscow." Actually, in her first term.
Oh, wow.
And I said no. My career is just starting actually, and I'd like to first establish myself before I step into the public, in a public career. Otherwise, I'll just be seen as a flunky, somebody who's just picked up with no real, runs on the board. So she said, "I understand." The second time around, she said, "Well, you can't say no to me now.
Wow.
You're established, you have a career, everyone knows who you are." And I still said to her, I said, "You're sending me," at that time, that was our top diplomatic post. I said, "You're sending me to the top diplomatic post. I have no experience." And she turned around and said, "Well, when I became prime minister, I had no experience either.
Amazing.
So if I can do it, you can do it too." She was an amazing person to work with because she did her homework. She read, she listened. She had strong views, no doubt about it, and she'd had so much exposure to, foreign policy in a way that there wasn't much that you could brief her about. But she was ever ready to listen and to absorb and to internalize and then take a decision. She came on a visit to the United States, and it was an incredible visit. Because it was on that visit that she managed to not only charm President Bill Clinton, but also to convince him that the sanctions that the US had imposed on Pakistan on the nuclear issue, were just, they're not working. And they would not work. This is not the way you treat a country. That sanctions were a blunt instrument of policy, and that the US has to play fair by Pakistan. And he was convinced. But you see, she did a lot of work on that visit. She would never go into a room thinking, "Well, I'll just ad lib because, I'm a star anyway," which she was. A celebrity, a star. She didn't just rely on that. She did the hard work that she had to do so that she was well versed. She knew the talking points. She knew the country's policy. She knew exactly what she had to ask the other side. And on the Hill, she was incredible. Of course, they all loved her. She was such a such a star, as I said. But with all these congressmen and senators, I've never seen something quite like the way that they responded to her. But again, she didn't just want to bask in that kind of celebrityhood, if I can call it that, stardom. But she had very clear objectives, that she wanted outcomes. So she went in there to ask them for something, which is, of course, something that was consistent with our overall policy goals. So it was amazing. And of course, I was in telephonic touch with her on and off from Washington. That helped me a lot because I got, direct sort of access as well as guidance from the chief executive. And as I said, on this visit, she turned the relationship around. I would say single-handedly at that time. So Pakistan went from sanctions to a normalized relationship with the United States and a much improved relationship with the United States. So, that was remarkable.
While you were talking about it, I thought about it, and it clearly indicates a degree of hard work. But I think something else that comes to mind, which is humility, or at least groundedness, to do the hard work and the preparation. Because somehow in our part of the world, it feels that if you are an extempore, if you're a star, and you can go and wing it. And on the other hand, you have the parchi versus the non-parchi debate, which happens in foreign policy, criticism of our leaders. But actually, it's all about hard work. It's all about the work that is done before, often by the ambassadors. But knowing the talking points, sticking to them, the discipline of it on the stage, but also the preparation before. And I think you need to be very grounded and somewhat humble to know that you must put in the best foot forward to achieve the best outcomes for Pakistan.
I think you're right. The word humility is so important. It is the most disarming of qualities that anyone can have, and people don't sometimes realize that. They think that to show humbleness or to show humility means that you're somehow exposing some kind of weakness, whereas you should really be showing yourself to be super confident. I think you can exude confidence and humility at the same time. And I think one of the things that we must learn to do is be prepared to listen. To prepare to listen to the other, to hear a viewpoint different from our own. We may not agree with it, but I think, in our political culture, I think we've stopped listening. We don't listen. We just talk past each other all the time. No listening.
Absolutely. And so talking about listening, and so I would ask you this question. Did you ever listen to a certain conversation which said, are you with us or are you against us? Did that conversation happen?
Yes, it certainly did. It happened after 9/11. And we were not the only country with which the United States was conveying this.
Yes.
They were saying this to all the countries that they needed cooperation from. That, are you with us or you're against us? Because if you're not with us, we will construe that to mean that you're against us. So absolutely. I mean, the days following 9/11 were, some of the most challenging days of my diplomatic career. It's a very difficult time for us, for Pakistan. But I think we managed at that time to navigate through that crisis to the best of our ability, while protecting Pakistan's core interests.
And so when you were there in the pressure, and you were there in DC, and people will come, a delegation will come, and they'll go back to their homeland. But you were there, and so it's a lonely job at that time, and particularly all the tension on yourself. So what helped you at that time in terms of remaining grounded, or navigating, or finding your North Star, finding the path to getting the outcomes for Pakistan, or getting Pakistan out of a very tight situation?
I think two things really. A good team. I had a very good team. People sometimes used to call it the dream team. It was, again, luck of the draw. There just happened to be a combination of very outstanding diplomats. So the team was extremely helpful, and we gelled very well together. We could, in a way, de-stress ourselves by, joking with each other and having fun, actually, from time to time, because you had to also do that to decompress at a time of such a tense period. And then, of course, I didn't have my family with me, but because I could speak to them frequently in that period, so even by kind of a remote sort of family support, it was available to me. And that also helped me immensely. My son at that time was doing an internship in New York. So that was helpful. He was not very far away. He could come down on weekends. So really, family as well as a good, solid team. Because I think the most important, takeaway for me in any, whether it was my journalistic career or by my diplomatic career, was you're nothing without your team. You really are nothing. I mean, you have to be a good team leader, sure. And if you are in that position where you're leading a mission or you're leading a newspaper or whatever the case is, then yes, you have to actually show leadership and lead from the front, as the cliche goes, but it happens to be true. But then you also have to be a consensual leader and make sure that you listen to your team members, that they feel a sense of ownership in the decisions that you take, because then you get the kind of, you can motivate them, you get the kind of commitment and enthusiasm and zeal. So really the team is everything. And what amazes me is how governments in our country just don't think of that basic fundamental fact that if you're going to have a team crammed with just loyalists who are short on competence and long on just being supplicants, you're not going to be able to get the job done, I'm afraid, because no single individual in any profession, any area, maybe unless you're a rocket scientist, maybe you're some kind of inventor, then you can do this all on your own. But there's nothing that you really do on your own. You do need a collegial style, if I can put it that way, and you need great teamwork. Otherwise, you don't get good outcomes.
No, absolutely, and I do think there's a team effort. And I must say that when I watched you in those days post 9/11, I think your presence on television, whether with Wolf Blitzer or others, was always very calming, was very reassuring. And I'm sure a lot of work was being done behind the scenes by your team, and there are many.
It wasn't just work. There were a lot of tranquilizers to calm me down.
Okay. No, you look very calm now. So they did in fact work. There's the Congress, there's the Senate, there is the defense, there is the State Department. You've got like so many points where you have to have people to man those forts. And so definitely it's a Herculean effort by any single person or a team. I think that's fantastic. So let's going into the US-Pakistan relationship. Of course, we have gone through, when we talk about economics, our economics is also linked to foreign policy of the US. We've had 3 great times of economic growth. They're all coincide with good relations with the US, whether it's the Cold War, 1960s, whether it was the Afghan War in 1980s, or it was the War on Terror, it was 2000. So clearly Pakistan's both foreign policy and economy are very intrinsically tied to the US, but we have not found common ground with the US that goes beyond 5 to 7 year, let's say, bull run. I'm an economist, I think in terms of economics. So a bull run in foreign policy or alliance with the US has never gone beyond 5 to 7 years across 5-7 decades. So where is the expectation mismatch on side of the US, and you can be very frank, where they are wrong and they expect too much, and where there is fault that lies within us and maybe we expect too much, so that we find more common ground with the US, which is more sustaining and more sustainable.
Well, it's interesting because your question first, I'd like to answer, the initial dimension of your question, which, where you suggested that periods of economic growth coincided with good relations with the United States. And in my opinion, this set up a perverse incentive for our rulers. What it did was to get them addicted to outside help rather than internal reform. So I often used to think of this as external overreach and internal underreach, where you relied on other people's money and not your own effort to keep yourself going. So I'm not too sure that, look, there was nothing wrong with what was happening. It's what we did with it. If these periods of, close relationship with the West was helping us get financial assistance and even investment, then we should have used that fiscal space that we had to create a self-sustaining economy. Which our rulers failed to do, sadly. And I think, there are very few exceptions to this reality that the addiction or the habit of relying on the outside world or the outsider, whoever the outsider is. In that case, as you were quoting, there were 3 periods of close alignment, which happened to be with the United States. But, we failed to turn that opportunity into the basis of economic growth or economic prosperity on a sustainable basis. So, I think it just set up a perverse incentive. Now, when you say, why have the relationship only, they've been brief periods or not such prolonged periods, certainly not sustained periods of good relations between Pakistan and the United States. I mean, the reason is very simple. It's, when interests converged, we had a good relationship. When interests did not converge, the relationship went into there were dips. In fact, we've often described this relationship as a roller coaster. And, the three phases in which the relationship was good, they were all driven by extraneous factors. They were not intrinsic to Pakistan in terms of Pakistan's intrinsic importance. Pakistan became a function of America's need, which was external to Pakistan. Each time, either it was Afghanistan, twice it was Afghanistan, and the first time, as you mentioned yourself, it was the Cold War. So I think the challenge now, that's history, but the challenge now is to find the basis for a relationship that is predicated on Pakistan's intrinsic importance. And that, I'm afraid, can only happen in a substantive way when Pakistan is able to strengthen and empower itself economically. We cannot possibly be a bankrupt state and expect then to have, strong relationships, and that's where, foreign policy is, inextricably connected to domestic strength. If your domestic base is weak, you can't expect to have a foreign policy that is strong. I mean, it's kind of, it's blindingly obvious. But sometimes our governments and ruling elites fail to understand this connection. And they claim that they are, doing extremely well on the foreign policy front, when all they're doing is asking countries for money. I mean, if that's doing well on the foreign policy front, then I really don't know what it means to do badly on the foreign policy front. So, foreign policy has to reflect your internal strength or weakness, whatever the case may be.
So if you think about internally what we can offer to anyone or as a nation for ourselves, it's our people. So that's one thing, people as a resource, human capital, I would say. Number two thing, and then that could lead into economics. The third thing that could be is culture, values. I think that has a lot of resonance. And of course, the fourth element, which a lot of people, we have had convergence, is defense. But defense, of course, your enemies change, the circumstances change, and that's why it's not permanent. So you feel that the focus on culture, values, democracy, freedom, tolerance, that's what's appreciated in certain parts of the world, or as actually developing the people, that's what's been missing in case of Pakistan, and that has not happened in building relationship.
Look, our foreign policy has failed to integrate soft power. And soft power is what you're referring to. Yes. Which basically, simply means the power of being liked. You can be liked because of your culture, your, music, your songs, your poetry, tourism. Your literature.
Yeah, tourism.
Or you can be liked for your tourism. So basically, countries having a favorable impression of you because of various dimensions, and your conduct actually too. Don't forget your conduct in terms of your human rights record, your conduct in terms of your, democratic evolution, if you like. All of that, these are all elements of soft power.
Your conduct with multinational institutions like the IMF and saying one thing and then doing something else.
But this is, I think, where the failure lies. Soft power has not been integrated into Pakistan's foreign policy ever. Yes, individuals have made efforts, an ambassador here and an ambassador there, but I have never come across a plan that the foreign ministry or the government of the day has evolved in which soft power is integrated as a critical element. No such thing. In fact, this is the problem. You see, so much happens in silos. We do not connect all of this in a coherent way, because if we were to connect it, then it would be a strategy. But otherwise, it's just efforts in silos, which don't really amount to very much then.
This is a very interesting point. And if you look at the US foreign policy, there is a US national security document or doctrine. So post 9/11, it was preemption. And there is a document on preemption. And then how does it then translate into policy, doctrine translate to policy, and the policy into actions, and how different bodies of the state can act? It is, it is worked out very well. But that has never happened in Pakistan. Is that the case?
Well, I think there has been a
process.
sense.
I'm talking about the
No, there's no such thing that we have ever done. I mean, in fact, in recent years, we haven't even done the most basic, which was to hold an envoys conference where different envoys come together, even if it's not all the envoys, but at least from key countries. Pakistan has not carried out a review of its foreign policy in as long as I can remember. I think the last time we did it was post 9/11. Wow. The last time that I saw or participated in an envoys conference on a large scale was during President Musharraf's time. I haven't seen that happen subsequently. Whereas, as you know, the world has changed and is changing in such a fundamental and such a speedy way that we need to. I know countries review their foreign policies, all the time, but we don't do that. And if we don't do that, then how can we evolve a strategy that is coherent? Because otherwise, all that happens are ad hoc responses to what is happening in the world, or you're responding to what other countries' initiatives are towards you, not your own initiative. I can't think of a single foreign policy initiative that Pakistan has taken in I don't know how many years now. I just haven't come across any. So sure, I mean, our domestic weakness has something to do with this, of course. But I think the one thing that has struck me as I served as a diplomat was the failure of imagination. I mean, unless you have the capacity to imagine what you can do and should do, both in terms of domestic policy, public policy, as well as foreign policy, you're going to be stuck in a rut. You'll basically do more of the same. And more of the same is, it's not how it should be.
So do you think that, so if you look at countries just similar to us like India, I mean, for no other reason, because they have similar kind of history, institutional structure, is it because there is a certain unity of command in their foreign policy? It is driven either by the cabinet division or it is driven by the foreign office? Is it because they have done and they have been more sustainable and have come up with initiatives, more sustaining impact compared to us?
No, I think it's because they're a bigger country and they have domestic economic strength. Plus, I think they've had democratic continuity. Our case is the lack of political stability, the lack of economic stability. All of this feeds into the foreign policy process or the lack of it. I also think that we've had leaders who've been very, very interested in foreign policy. I think I worked for two of them, Benazir Bhutto and Musharraf. And then we've had leaders, and I don't want to name them, but they were not foreign policy, let's say, foreign policy prime ministers. Yeah. Their focus was elsewhere. There's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. You do come across people in the world who are more focused within rather than without. And that does make a difference, because then you're not providing the leadership to the foreign ministry, which needs the leadership. I mean, bureaucrats don't make policy, they implement policy. They can make inputs into policy, of course, but policy decisions are taken by political leaders, whether they come from the military or they come from a democratic background. So I think there's much work to be done in the area of foreign policy, but I think the fundamental starting point has to be undertaking a review of foreign policy in which our envoys spread out across the world, are either convened and called back, not all of them, but let's say the bulk of them, and they make their contributions or they make their inputs into this review as we see a world which is in flux. It's in so many changes are happening. I mean, one week you hear the Saudi-Iranian rapprochement, the next week you hear some Arab countries making peace with Israel, for example. So I'm not recommending any course of action, but I'm just saying, the world is changing. And, as we know, economic power is now shifted from the West to the rest. There's no question about it. Yeah. So the area of opportunity lies in the East. And yet our ruling elite is so, their minds are so addicted to a certain, I always say that they operate with mental maps of the past.
Right.
And in diplomacy, if you do not operate with mental maps of the present and the future, and again, using the imagination, to come up with creative, imaginative foreign policy, then, as I said, it's just going to be ad hoc responses to international developments or some developments at home. That doesn't make for very effective foreign policy.
And I think you're right. I think in the UN, you must have faced what a big, strong bloc the African nations are, and how little emphasis we have on, attracting them or canvassing with them. And that's probably done at the ambassadorial level, but not as a national security foreign policy strategy. So tell us about your time as the permanent ambassador at UN. How had the world changed from 9/11? What challenges Pakistan faced, and particularly the narrative that Pakistan, proposes or projects? There is really a lack of empathy or understanding of it that has developed. Is that the case?
No, I think at the UN, Pakistan commands a great deal of respect. And that is owed both to its use of hard power and soft power. Hard power in the sense that Pakistan has been a world leader amongst, world leaders in contributing troops to UN peacekeeping missions. In fact, that is the only basis on which we had relationships with African countries, because much of UN peacekeeping happens to be in Africa. So you're absolutely right. I mean, you cannot win any elected position, seat on any UN body in the UN without having Africa's support, because they're a large bloc, as you said. And, when I used to go lobby, all I could say was, we've done so much peacekeeping, and they would appreciate that. And we would get the vote on that basis. But we had nothing else to, beyond that. So hard power, soft power in terms of, I think, the ideas that distinguished Pakistanis have contributed at the UN. Mahbub Haq, yes. Dr. Mahbub Haq, who came up with, as you know, the notion of how to implement human security, and then the Human Development Index. He came up with that. And then we had, the UN Population Agency was headed by a woman. Yes. Again, distinguished, a woman who contributed so much in the realm of ideas. So although in Pakistan, we still think of just hard power, in terms of military or even economic relationships, the contribution you can make in the realm of ideas endures forever and ever and ever, actually. So, you had these, and then you had Dr. Shamshad Akhtar, who headed one of the UN economic agencies. Now, these were people who contributed ideas. So soft power in the sense of, again, an area that stayed with people, stayed on the minds of people. And these were enduring, lasting contributions. So at the UN, Pakistan, because of its early role in the struggle for freedom by colonized nations, we played a very key role in the early years, having, achieved freedom ourselves from colonial rule. So that stood us in very good stead and created a lot of goodwill for us in the early years, 50s, 60s, going into the 70s. And then these individuals who contributed so much. And there were many other, many people whose names I will not take because there's so many of them who served at the UN, Pakistanis, distinguished Pakistanis, made a huge difference. And then I think, once I got there, I found that we had also participated a great deal in norm building and in norm evolution, because a lot of the debates at the UN are about building norms. And there, Pakistan has been very active on every front, whether it's peacekeeping, peace and security front, whether it's a development front, whether it's a human rights front. So there, first of all, not first of all, but I would say, I think the diplomatic assignment I enjoyed the most, which was the most fulfilling for me, was at the United Nations.
Oh, wow.
Because you are ambassador to the world. You learn about nations you actually never even heard of, to be honest with you. You build relationships with people from, Latin America, the Caribbean, the small island states, Africa, Southeast Asia, I mean, the whole world. And really, the kind of opportunities you have, the diplomatic space that you have to try to push Pakistan's interests and goals is enormous. So it really is up to you, how active you want to be, or how inert you want to be, where you just do the minimal and, do your 3 years and come home. Or you say, no, this I'm going to, I want to do much more, because the ground that is available to me, the space that's available to me is huge. So, in all these areas, all the critical pillars on which, the UN rests, peace and security, human rights, development, and now newer issues that have come to the UN, whether it's climate change or it's migration, all of these issues, we have a position. And I think the more active we are, the more we then enjoy the respect of other nations. And there, let me tell you, we do negotiate as part of blocs. And the two blocs that are very important for us are the G77 in China. So we negotiate on development issues as part of this bloc. It's a very powerful bloc, as you can imagine. And the other is the OIC, which is much underappreciated for good reason on many fronts. But at the UN in New York, the OIC holds together on a number of issues, despite the Saudi-Iran problem that we have encountered in the past, and the Iraq war, which also had divided the world, and the Yemen war. Despite all of that, I mean, we had all those differences, but on many critical issues, the OIC would hold together. And the two countries that led that bloc in New York were Pakistan, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. I should say not two countries, but 3 countries. So we were in a leadership position there also to shape opinion, to influence their activities. So, when they say the world is your oyster, in a way, the UN in New York was one's oyster. One could do so much. And I would say there is so much more to do. I also think that the only time that I felt that being a woman was helpful was because we, the female representatives there, the female ambassadors there, we formed a club. There were about 55 of us when I was there. Now I believe there are about 70. And it was a very tightly knit club. It was a girls' club. Yeah. We used to have a lot of fun.
But in New York.
Yeah, in New York. But we watched each other's back.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that female solidarity amongst women ambassadors at the UN, I found that to be so helpful in, again, promoting Pakistan's interests and Pakistan's issues.
You certainly put a best foot forward for Pakistan. I was a participant in one of the events on youth and their skill development and how do you take them away from violence. And certainly I do remember on watching it Twitter some of the Pakistani artists that you had invited to the United Nations. And this is all part of soft power and being light and being relatable, which is very, very important.
Yes, I mean, I use soft power basically to enable Pakistan to win elections there. So I wasn't just using it as a goodwill instrument or vehicle. We had several elections that we had to win. And around those, I built one, I think the first concert ever that Pakistan did in the General Assembly Hall by Rahat Fateh Ali Khan, where we started with Allahu. It's the first time that Allahu echoed in the chambers of the world's parliament. And then I did another concert there by a Pakistani group from Lahore, which did fusion music. I did numerous art exhibitions. I did 2 Pakistan film festivals. And I did street food at the UN, where, we got all these young people who work at the UN to line up to have samosas and chaat. But again, just to show, and we use truck art to sort of, make these carts on which Pakistani cuisine was served. So, Pakistan has so much to offer, really, from art to music to culture to food. It's just amazing. It's just that we don't make enough use, because to make use of them, you have to first, 1, take pride in them, and 2, enjoy them. I mean, I love music. There's no other reason why I would take all these people there unless I enjoyed it myself. It's not a chore.
Yes. Absolutely. So I think coming back to your soft power and the role of people, individuals in projecting Pakistan, 2 challenges that I see. One is, and this is what I felt, I don't know about UN, but definitely World Bank and the IFCs, that the pipeline of talent or senior people that is in those organizations at a certain level is now dwindling, or it has been dwindling for the last 10 to 15 years. And the reason why that the bureaucracy, which generally nurtured and trained them and then sent them abroad, whether it was Moeen Qureshi or Dr. Ishrat and others, that's certainly not as of that quality as it used to be in 1970s and 80s. So that pipeline is now dwindling because of the lowering of standards in education and exposure that has generally happened, number one. Number two, what I do feel is that the narrative, if we are talk about Kashmir or security, has now less takers. That's at least what I felt when I was at the UN. And it is even to countries who are in the Middle East, Muslim countries, it is a hard sell to them. Do you agree with that in that case, that those 2 challenges and how to overcome them?
Yeah. I think you're right. The number of Pakistanis who served in these multilateral institutions. Look at the World Bank. We had, 2 Pakistanis who served as vice presidents.
Yes.
At the UN also, we had a distinguished Pakistani who served as chef de cabinet, chief of staff to the UN Secretary General. And you had, as I said, Pakistanis running UN agencies, head of UN agency. We don't have that anymore. There's none of that. So there needs to be a more concerted effort, I think, by Pakistan at the official level to ensure that people are made aware of positions that fall vacant, for example, or competitive positions that you can apply for, or when the UN UN officials and the Secretary General is looking around, because many of the appointments are made by him, solely by him. So you need to have enough of you can't have a thin bench. So you've got to have enough of a heavy bench where you're able to, put forward people with extraordinary professional backgrounds and skills so that they are then, available and likely to be chosen. So that's one of the things that we need to do. As far as Pakistan's narrative, I think at the UN you do lots of issues. Pakistan is not identified by 1 or 2 issues there. We are identified by our stand on global issues, as well as on our issues which are our national, our own core interest issues. And our identity, our reputation is built on this entire spectrum of these issues. So it's a lot of other issues also on which, as I was explaining to you, whether it's human rights, it's development, peace and security, peacekeeping, and many of your issues. Yeah, climate change. So I think it's how we, project ourselves on those issues and the positions that we take. Actually, it's not just a matter of projection. It's you've got to have a position before you can project anything. So I think, I still feel, look, Pakistan has served on the UN Security Council as a non-permanent member every 10 years. which is quite a distinction. So, and you have to get elected to that. So we've served 7 times. We're going to be contesting elections again. We've also served in the Human Rights Council. We've been elected there several times, 6 or 7 times, I forget now. Now, there's a reason why, why would we be elected? People do see Pakistan as bringing some value to the table, being a responsible international sort of player at the multilateral level. So these are important things, but they're often not known in Pakistan. And they're often not, people don't take pride in them. I think it's important, and I'm glad that you're doing this. I hope people are going to watch this. It's important for people to also know where Pakistan is thought so well of. And we can do even better, in fact, despite all our internal problems, challenges, crises, and weaknesses.
No, and absolutely indeed. I think, and this is amazing, given the country which doesn't have a organized foreign policy, no foreign policy process, to be so prominent and to get yourself elected is definitely a combination of the fact that we have inherent strengths.
Yes.
As a nation, we do, whether location, whether number of people, talent, the global outlook of our people. I mean, you wouldn't find, frankly, Indonesians in global places like you have Pakistanis, and I think I've always found that is a very positive thing. People do have met and have had positive experience of working with Pakistanis. So I think, and then of course, officials who have worked very hard. I would call them public entrepreneurs that they have gone beyond the call of duty to do good for Pakistan. I think that has really played a big role in Pakistan punching above its weight.
Yes, exactly. if you want to put it that way.
And so now, just zooming out and thinking about like grants, diplomacy, foreign policy in the future, do you think? At first I would go towards Russia and what happened there, because certainly. There is a big game at play between whether it's Russia, China, and the US. You know about the Thucydides trap, which, and one of the common things also, you were a fellow at the Kennedy School, and I went to graduate school at the Kennedy School. Graham Allison talks about is that the war between a rising power and a status quo power is almost inevitable. And when I see what happened with Russia, and technically, I think the US came down pretty hard, both on economic side of it, the economics boycott of Russia, be it corporate, other countries, the digital, how journalists and RT was pulled out from Twitter and other things, as well as the support that has gone on to Ukraine is quite at a different level. So, do you foresee the great contest between the empires, and primarily I would say China and the Russia or US, the great powers, to play out, and then that would be defining the next 50 years?
Well, I think the relationship that's going to be defining the next 50 years, and it's today, the defining element of the international landscape is the one between the United States and China, the world's most consequential relationship. Russia is in a different league altogether. It's a waning power. I don't think Russia enters into this equation at all. In fact, it has done itself a great disservice by its invasion of Ukraine, which has put it on completely the wrong side of history. At a time when it was a waning power, the last thing you want to do is to weaken yourself even more in the eyes of the international community and otherwise too. So this is the big geopolitical reality, which is US-China. And obviously, Pakistan's strategic and overriding priority is China, its relationship with China. Its relationship with the United States is not of the same order as it was before, because it was a function of geopolitical developments that, as I said to you before, were extraneous to the relationship. But, obviously, Pakistan would want to continue to have a good, normal working relationship with the United States. But I think the two relationships are no longer, in any way co-equal. So, when it's said that we have to balance our relations, you balance between two, roughly equivalent powers. These are not equivalent powers for us anymore. America has made its strategic choice. Its partner of choice in the region is India.
India, of course.
Its overwhelming strategic goal is containment of China. For us, China is our, as they say, all-weather friend. Happens to be true. And we will not obviously sign up to any such anti-China coalition. So that clearly circumscribes the space for relations between Pakistan and the United States, which is fine. I mean, this is the phase that we're in. This is the phase that we are going to be navigating through. So I think that's where we are. I mean, we obviously don't want to get into the crosshairs of this confrontation between the two superpowers. But at the same time, that's easier said than done. Much as we would not like to be sucked into any such great power rivalry, we have to be very clear where our long-term interests lie, and they lie with China.
So, it's very refreshing to get an emphatic and clear point of view from you. But it's very confusing because for anyone making policy, but even for myself, it's very distant from it. Because if you look at it, your people, your culture, and your exports, they are all towards US. Your family and all those linkages. But of course, the economics of it is not, or the future of it ties with China, and I do think that there was this confusion does play out in the policy, because beginning of 2022 in the first quarter, there was a very emphatic policy statement which was, let's turn towards the US. But now today we hear that we are not joining the meeting of all the democratic states, and we are boycotting it, or we're not attending it. So there seems to be at a certain policy making level a bit of a confusion as to which side we should be.
No, I don't think. I disagree. I don't think there's any confusion. I disagree. I think it's very clear where our economic and our long-term strategic interests lie. They're with China. We made it very clear to the United States that we will not be part of any strategy that seeks to counter China. We have a fundamental objection to their Indo-Pacific strategy because we feel that entire strategy is all about containing China, and they've decided to make India one of the key pivots.
Linchpins, yes.
Linchpins, if you like, of this strategy. I mean, that's not going to bring any joy to Pakistan, surely. So I don't think there's any confusion. Not joining the Democracy Summit, I think, is the correct decision. How could we join a summit when we have a one China policy and Taiwan attends that and is invited to that? It's absurd. Plus, this whole Democracy Summit was driven by America, or Biden, actually. It was more Biden who wanted to use some kind of ideological sort of concept in America's confrontation with China. So he wanted to counterpoise democracies against autocratic countries, according to him. And China, Russia, Turkey, etc., were put in one camp, and the rest of the world in another. Now, we don't think that the world is divided along these lines. And why should the world be divided along these lines? The internal arrangements for each country is the sovereign choice of those countries. We may desire for countries to be democratic, but that's a desire. It's up to them how they want to arrange their political life. So I think, not joining it doesn't mean that we've taken an anti-America step. We've simply said, we don't want to be part of this because it is driven by an effort to contain China. This is just one more strand in America's sort of very transparent strategy to put China in the dock. And, that's their policy, fine, but we don't agree with it. So I don't see any confusion at all. It's very clear. I mean, it's a different matter that some, part of our political elite just is so wedded to the West that they can't seem to get out of that. Well, good luck to them. They need to also read up on how the world has changed.
So I'm referring to a certain think tank speech that was done towards in April
This,
2022. I'm referring to that speech particularly.
I mean, this is
orientation.
Asia's century. I mean, if they read what Western think tanks are saying, they also are saying the same thing. The power is very decisively shifted to the East. There's no doubt about it.
Even Obama said the pivot to Asia.
Yes, exactly.
He talked about it. So I think one thing that is then clear of all this thing is that the US has decided the gloves are off. So when I talked about Russia, they were trying to teach China a lesson, or at least degrade Russia to such an extent in the future, it's not in a position to support China. So, but US has come out very openly. So whether it is the daughter of the founder of Huawei, who was in Canada, she was put in prison, or whether it is the decision for the US that all US nationals are forbidden to work in Chinese semiconductor industry, which has been a huge setback. And suddenly you realize all these people have to go out of China. The US is going to push for confrontation. And so a confrontation with China, both economic, diplomacy. And so for us to chart our path is going to be very difficult and a very choppy, whether when we are economically weak, dependent on Western financial institutions, and internally quite divided. What is the solution? Like, how can we navigate such choppy waters?
Well, I don't think we're reliant on Western financial assistance. We may be needing a tranche or two from the IMF, but remember, the financing gap in recent years has been filled by no Western country. Saudi Arabia, China, UAE. These are the countries, even today, the countries that are expected to help Pakistan through its economic crisis. Not a single one of them are in the West. So let's be clear on the facts first. But yes, you're right. Certainly the tech war between the United States and China has implications, not just for us, but for the rest of the world as well. So we need to do some long-term thinking. And unfortunately, we are so mired in our day-to-day political crisis that we're unable to, even get our head above the water and think about these long-term issues. These are important issues. And we need to see where we're going to position ourselves if this confrontation intensifies in a direction of the kind that you were indicating. So, when you say, well, what can we do? All foreign policy begins at home. No foreign policy begins abroad. So unless we get our own house in order, we fix our economy, we fix our politics, we're able to strengthen and empower ourselves domestically. And the critical choices we have to make are not on foreign policy. The critical choices we have to make are on domestic public policy. If we can do that, then foreign policy will flow from there. Then we'll find ourselves with more friends in the world. Then we'll find ourselves with more enduring relationships in the world. And of course, we will find ourselves above all earning more respect from the international community than we have right now. Should we end on this note? I think this is a good note to end on.
And just one final one, which is actually brings back home. I think it's so. And that's fantastic. That's how foreign policy brings back home. And so, so let's finish at home and talk about the governance model that we have in Pakistan. The concept of the Western liberal democracy is born out of the 18th century Enlightenment and the principles that come out of it. And that's what has worked, and that's what has been successful in the world. But with the advent of digital age, a lot of thinkers are thinking there is too much power in the hands of the Twitterati. Those old mode of governance, democracy may be outdated, and hence wherever there is democracy, there is a lot of chaos as well. We see the rise of either the right wing or the left wing. So what is the future of democracy? And in the world, in a digital age where people are much more empowered, knowledge is much more available. And then how does Pakistan find the balance, the right governance balance, so we can maximize the potential of Pakistan, its people, and the resources that we have?
Well, as a final question, because I do have other commitments now, this is the last part of what we have to discuss. I would say democracy is in trouble across the world. It's being challenged by new factors that have emerged. And I think people's impatience with the way elected governments, which are operating on a short electoral cycle and only think of whatever they need to think of public policy short term, that is affecting democracy across the world. So it is under challenge, and it's also under challenge because of the rise of right-wing populist forces. We see that in not just the United States, but we see that in Europe. We also see it in our neighborhood in India. And this form of populism is a challenge because it is based not on tolerance, but on a large amount of intolerance, especially of somebody who doesn't share your faith or who doesn't look like you. So whether it is targeted at migrants or it's targeted at minorities, this kind of populism is undermining democracy in many parts of the world. I think in our own case, the situation is somewhat different. Our democracy has been undermined because we've never been able to operate democracy for any length of time without the military intervening. And unfortunately, most of our political leaders or parties, not all, but most, have looked towards the army for support and for intervention on their side. So whatever the case, this lack of democratic continuity lies at the root of our problem. And I think along with that, the forces of intolerance that have arisen in Pakistani society in recent decades have also much to do with undermining the democratic experiment, because what we see today in our politics is just a complete lack of tolerance of the other, the inability to accept a political view which is different from their own. And therefore, the basis of any democracy has to be on give and take, compromise, mutual tolerance. If these factors are absent, then democracy remains, the shell of democracy remains, but at its core, it's sort of shorn of its substance. So I think what we are struggling with in Pakistan is very different from why democracy is under challenge in other parts of the world. Some elements, yes, would be in common. As I said, when there are factors which are making for intolerance, yes, those are common to other countries as well. But our historical experience and our current experience is such that I think we just need to persist with democracy, but ensure also that democracy delivers effective governance. And democracy shouldn't just be for a privileged elite that comes in, enriches itself, and then goes out and contests the election all over again. The notion of public policy, the notion of public welfare, that has to be embedded in our democracy, which I'm afraid it isn't really. These elites come in really for a lot of time for self-enrichment or self-empowerment at the very least, and do very little in terms of governance. Now, when you say governance model, I think there's also a need for Pakistan to undertake wide-ranging institutional reform, because our bureaucratic structure is completely out of sync with the needs of modern governance. We are still burdened with a structure that we inherited from colonial rule that may have worked for that time, 75 years ago. But it's certainly, this is a generalist civil service. It's not attracting our best and the brightest in our country. And we need a more specialized civil service and I think not an over-bloated state bureaucracy, which we have today, a lean and mean machine, but that should be professional, specialized, and above all, committed to the citizens of this country, because, this bureaucracy is still about themselves. It's not about service. It's not about public service, not about serving the people. It's about it's neither civil nor service anymore.
Any
Okay.
parting thoughts? Your last parting thoughts?
No, I think you covered so much ground that you
Great.
left very little for me to say, but it's a great pleasure. Your questions were very, very, I think, they touched on just the right issues that we need to be having more of a debate about. So I'm very grateful to you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ambassador Maleeha Lodhi. Always a pleasure to be with you and to have this very detailed discussion and to listen to you, your experiences, and the message will go to a lot of young people and hopefully cause
I
them
hope so.
more inspiration in public service and representing Pakistan both locally and abroad. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time for another episode of Alchemy of Transformation, where we discussed foreign policy in depth in Pakistan, but also zooming out, looking at what's happening around the world, the US-China rivalry, and how it will pan out over the next 50 years to 100 years. Ambassador Lodhi was explained how her experience working in the US and in the UN showed that Pakistan does need a cohesive foreign policy, a national security process to create a framework and to leverage some of our strengths which we don't use enough, which is our people, our human capital, our culture, our values, and our conduct, our professional conduct of Pakistanis working at top levels in multilateral agencies like the UN and the World Bank. So please subscribe to the channel Alchemy of Transformation, and I look forward to joining you next time with another episode.